From time immemorial, anthropologists and linguists, through their lens, held conversations regarding the effect of culture on language, how language affects society, and the way we global citizens think. Concomitantly, since the aforesaid seems plausible, then the five fundamental characteristics of language include cultural relevance, symbolism, flexibility, variation, and social importance is critical to this discourse. However, logically speaking, in the scheme of things, language therefore is perceived as a vital part of human connection. In this context, it is highly probable that perhaps this line of reasoning draws our attention to the fact that although all species have their ways of communicating, yet humans are the only ones that have mastered cognitive language communication. For example, language allows us to share our ideas, thoughts, and feelings with others. It also behaves somewhat like a rhetorical device that uses an ostensible self-contradiction to illustrate a rhetorical point or to reveal a paradox, because it has the power to build societies and also tear them down at the same time. For culture to be arbitrary, it has to be taught and learned and shared only from the position of conscious or an unconscious position. This view is embraced by Luminen learning, who cites culture as the patterns of learned and shared behavior and beliefs of a particular social, ethnic, or age group. It can also be described as the complex whole of collective human beliefs with a structured stage of civilization that can be specific to a nation or time period. Moreover, as this discourse is viewed through another lens by Otis.com, there's evidence which suggests that being exposed to diverse cultures can help you appreciate more in life. Otis.com further highlights that they are relevant in this conversation because the more you interact with people from different cultures, the more you value and respect them. When you learn about cultural diversity, you can also learn more about geography, religion, and history. Although all things can be construed as being equal, yet in this context, culture is not monolithic, and individuals exist within a culture. Decisively, culture is symbolic. Meaning is ascribed to behavior, words, and objects, and this meaning is objectively arbitrary, subjectively logical, and rational. When the proverbial dust is settled, especially in the scheme of things, this hypothesized posited question, is culture a symbolic universal language, must be asked. This question can become a cultural phenomenon because it has the characteristics of a bandwagon effect, which occurs when certain individuals behave a certain way merely because other individuals do as well. The thing that gains popularity is not a cultural phenomenon, but rather the cultural phenomenon is the process of something becoming popular. For the reason that the meaning attached to symbols are arbitrary, different interpretations of a symbol can occur in different cultural contexts, which are both verbal and non-verbal in form within cultural systems, and they have a unique way of linking human beings to each other. Culture is systemic, and in systems theory, systems are interrelated, interconnected parts that create a whole. They are patterns of behavior deeply rooted in structural systems which are beneath the waterline. In a sense, cultures are the residue of social communication. As individuals start to engage in communication with the other members of this new group, they begin to create a set of shared experiences and ways of talking about them. According to collinsdictionary.com, a language is a system of communication which consists of a set of songs and written symbols which are used by the people of a particular country or region for talking or writing. Given the specifics of this statement, through my metaphoric and philosophic lens, contextually speaking, as an author, media arts specialist, licensed cultural practitioner, and publisher, hypothesizing whether culture is a symbolic universal language or not should not conflate this issue, but rather allow it to be philosophized, because my theory is predicated on cultural anthropologist Alfred L. Corbrier's ideology. Corbrier advocated that if culture is a consequence of the interactions of humans, then their acts of communication are their cultural manifestations within a specific community. Therefore, on this stage, according to Luhmann, humans consciously and subconsciously are always striving to make sense of their surrounding world. That is why symbols such as gestures, signs, objects, signals, and words help people understand that world, and they provide clues to understanding experiences by conveying recognizable meanings that are shared by societies. The world is filled with symbols. Sports uniforms, company logos, and traffic signs are symbols. In some cultures, a gold ring is a symbol of marriage. Some symbols are highly functional. Stop signs, for instance, provide useful instruction. As physical objects, they belong to material culture. But because they function as symbols, they also convey non-material cultural meanings. Some symbols are valuable only in what they represent. Trophies, blue ribbons, or gold medals, for example, serve no other purpose than to represent accomplishments. But many objects have both material and non-material symbolic value. Language and culture are intertwined. For example, a particular language usually points out to a specific group of people. When you interact with another language, it means that you're also interacting with the culture that speaks the language. You cannot understand one's culture without accessing its language directly. When you learn a new language, it not only involves learning its alphabet, the word arrangement, and the rules of grammar, but also learning about the specific society's customs and behavior. When learning or teaching a language, it's important that the culture where the language belongs be referenced, because language is very much ingrained in the culture. Complex is one term that you can use to describe human communication, since paralanguage is used to transmit messages. Paralanguage is specific to a culture. Therefore, the communication with other ethnic groups can lead to misunderstanding. When you grow up in a specific society, it is inevitable to learn the glances, gestures, and little changes in voice or tone and other communication tools to emphasize or alter what you want to do or say. These specific communication techniques of one culture are learned mostly by imitating and observing people, initially from parents and immediate relatives, and later from friends and people outside the close family circle. Another critical component of this discourse is body language, which is also known as kinesthetic, is the most obvious type of paralanguage. These are the postures, expressions, and gestures used as nonverbal language. However, it is likewise possible to alter the meaning of various words by changing the character or tone of the voice. The phrase language is culture and culture is language is often mentioned when language and culture are discussed. It's because the two have a homologous, although complex relationship. Language and culture develop together and influence each other as they evolve. Using this context, Alfred L. Kruger, a cultural anthropologist from the United States, said that culture started when speech was available, and from the beginning, the enrichment of either one led the other to develop further. If culture is a consequence of the interactions of humans, the acts of communication are their cultural manifestations within a specific community. Federico Rossi Landi, a philosopher from Italy whose work focused on philosophy, semiotics, and linguistics, joins the conversation and makes the claim that a speech community is made up of all the messages that were exchanged with one another using a given language, which is understood by the entire society. Rossi Landi further adds that young children learn their language and culture from the society where they were born. A case in point, when I was a child, every request that I made of my parents had to be prefaced with please. According to Rossi Landi, this action can be viewed as the process of learning. Help me to develop cognitive abilities as well. According to Professor Michael Silverstein, who teaches psychology, linguistics, and anthropology at the University of Chicago, culture's communicative pressure represents aspects of reality as well as connects different contexts. It means that the use of symbols that represent events, identities, feelings, and beliefs are also the method of bringing these things into the current context. For instance, whether culture is a symbolic universal language. Further, it is recorded in Britannica.com that there is a perception that language is much more than the external expression and communication of internal thoughts formulated independently of their verbalization. In demonstrating the inadequacy and inappropriateness of such a view of language, attention has already been drawn to the ways in which one's initiative language is intimately and in all sorts of details related to the rest of one's life in a community and to smaller groups within that community. This is true of all peoples and all languages, since it is a universal fact about language. This fact adds another piece to this cultural puzzle as to whether culture is a symbolic universal language. It's the fact that anthropologists speak of the relations between language and culture. It is indeed more in accordance with reality to consider language as a part of culture. Culture is here being used in the anthropological sense to refer to all aspects of human life, insofar as they are determined or conditioned by membership in a society. The fact that people eat or drink is not in itself cultural, it is a biological necessity for the preservation of life. That they eat particular foods and refrain from eating other substances, though they may be perfectly edible and nourishing, and that they eat and drink at particular times of day and in certain places are matters of culture, sometimes acquired by man as a member of society. According to the classic definition of culture by the English anthropologist Sir Edward Burnett Taylor, as thus defined and envisaged, culture covers a very wide area of human life and behavior, and language is manifestly a part, probably the most important part of it. Ty Fisher joins the discourse and makes the claim that, according to Michael Gordon, professor of history at Princeton University, on the Freakonomics podcast, made the telling point that today there is basically one common language for communication in the elite natural sciences like physics, biology, chemistry, and geology, which is overwhelmingly English. By overwhelmingly, I mean over 95% of world publication in those sciences are in English, and there's never been anything quite like that before. The legitimacy and perceptiveness of Gordon's line of reasoning presumably would have inspired him to make the aforesaid statement, which has also stimulated my intellect into thinking about whether culture is a symbolic universal language because it is metaphoric and can be philosophized. Presumably, almost every global citizen at some point has asked questions or given some thought to the fact as to whether culture is a symbolic universal language or not, because they are in pursuit of ascertaining information and or provoking a specific response from the person being addressed by indicating the information which the speaker or writer desires. However, there is a perception that questions can also be used for a number of other purposes, a view espoused by Wikipedia. It is noted that a question is an utterance which typically functions as a request for information, which is expected to be provided in the form of an answer. The question, is culture a symbolic universal language, can thus be understood as a kind of eloquentary act in the field of pragmatics, or as special kinds of propositions in frameworks of formal semantics, such as alternative semantics or inquisitive semantics. This question, is culture a symbolic universal language, is not conflated with interrogatives, which are the grammatical forms typically used to achieve them. Presumably, if culture is a symbolic universal language, then the same borders somewhat on a rhetorical question. Therefore, in all probability, it is interrogative in form and most definitely may not be considered as a true question, since rhetorical questions aren't expected to be answered. Conversely, the non-interrogative grammatical structures may be considered questions, as in the case of the imperative sentence, "Tell me your name." The more that I examine this topic, I am also cognizant of the fact that the most typical response to a question is an answer that provides the information indicated as being sought by the questioner. This may range from a simple yes or no in the case of yes or no questions, to a more complex or detailed answer. An answer may be correct or incorrect, depending whether the information it presents is true or false. An indication of inability or unwillingness to provide an answer is the other response to a question. Therefore, plausibly asking questions in this context are important, since it helps me to uncover the challenges I am facing and therefore propels me to generate better solutions to solve those problems. In context, dictionary.com describes an auxiliary language that is used and understood everywhere. In all probability, any kind of expression that is used and understood everywhere is music, since it is a universal language. On the other hand, in context, the same can also be said about culture, because, in all probability, culture is an expression that is used and understood everywhere. Everywhere in this context means geographical space. Helena Asprue has argued that new research from Harvard University shows that music carries a set of unique codes and patterns which are in fact universally understood. Likewise, culture code is a key method developed by Clotaire Rapelye to understanding the type of culture, unique cultural features encoded in some form of information to identify the culture. Cultural code defines a set of images that are associated with a particular set of stereotypes in our minds. This is a sort of cultural unconsciousness which is hidden even from our own understanding, but is also seen in our actions. The cultural codes of a nation helps to understand the behavioral responses characteristic of that nation's citizens. The key codes in understanding specific behaviors differentiate between religion, gender, relationships, money, food, health, and cultures. Music is in fact universal. The study concludes it exists in every society, both with and without words, varies more within than between societies, regularly supports certain types of behavior, and has acoustic features that are systematically related to the goals and responses of singers and listeners. But music is not a fixed biological response with a single prototypical adaptive function. It is produced worldwide in diverse behavioral contexts that vary in formality, arousal, and religiosity. Conversely, cultural diversity is the quality of diverse or different cultures as opposed to monoculture. The global monoculture, or a homogenization of cultures akin to cultural decay. The phrase cultural diversity can also refer to having different cultures respect each other's differences. The phrase cultural diversity is also sometimes used to mean the variety of human societies or cultures in a specific region or in the world as a whole. Globalization is often said to make a negative effect on the world's cultural diversity. A universal language could solve many of the problems associated with different cultures, including scientific progress, economics, and unfair socioeconomic advantages. Overall, despite the universality of music, inculturation has a pronounced effect on individuals' memory for music. Evidence suggests that people develop their cognitive understanding of music from their cultures. People are best at recognizing and remembering music in the style of their native culture, and their music recognition and memory is better for music from familiar but nominative cultures than it is for music from unfamiliar cultures. Part of the difficulty in remembering culturally unfamiliar music may arise from the use of different neural processes when listening to familiar and unfamiliar music. For instance, Brain areas involved in attention, including the right angular gyrus and middle frontal gyrus, show increased activity when listening to culturally unfamiliar music compared to novel but culturally familiar music. Now that I have fleshed out the aforesaid ideologies and theories, it is highly probable that in linguistics, semantics are the subfield that studies meaning. In addition, semantics, in a sense, plausibly can address meaning at the levels of words, phrases, sentences, or larger units of discourse. One of the crucial questions which unite different approaches to linguistic semantics are that of the relationship between form and meaning, especially interpreting whether culture is a symbolic universal language. According to vocabulary.com, the construct universal describes something for everything or everyone. If you are to make a universal change in a document, it means that every time the specified word appears, it should be fixed. Universal language may refer to a hypothetical or historical language spoken and understood by all or most of the world's population. It may be the idea of an international auxiliary language for communication between groups speaking different primary languages. Most scholars agree that there are approximately 7,000 different languages spoken by humans. Now that I have established context regarding this metaphoric, philosophized, pragmatic question, is culture a universal language? The same has the tendency to certainly stimulate our cognitive skills, just like music. According to Helena Asprow, music does appear to be tied to specific perceptual, cognitive, and affective faculties, including language. All societies put words to their songs. Motor control. People in all societies dance. Auditory analysis. All musical systems have signatures of tonality. And aesthetics. Their modalities and rhythms are balanced between monotony and chaos. It is because of all of the above theories are the reasons why the use of language is so deeply entrenched in human culture and justifies why I have framed culture as a symbolic universal language in ISBN 978 976 9653153 and 12 chapters.